Welcome back. We're already in week 3 of our semester, which doesn't sound like terribly far to go in terms of our schedule, but a reminder that we are coming up on our first exam, which will be next week. If you are not participating in discussions, please be sure to rectify that quickly because you're already behind. If you're having trouble keeping up, please be sure to reach out to me. I'll put all these links in Blackboard so you guys can see them. If you're struggling with Blackboard while we're on the subject, if you can't get access to it for some reason or another, please let me know ASAP, because you're going to need to reach out to IT and find out why that is. But these things will be important. Our first exam, I'll have some details on that at the beginning of next week. But it basically will be on everything we have covered so far, including this week and next week. Today we're going to talk about global media. We're going to talk about some about the American media system. That'll be probably more next week. And today was more focus on media as it functions kind of around the world. Okay, so for your first question or first reminder, and we'll go back and just talk about these things as we go forward, but just a reminder that we define communication in this class as the process of creating shared meaning. I will probably say this again next week and every other week between now and Christmas, whenever it is that we wrap up. Without shared meaning, there is no communication. If you've ever been lost somewhere where you couldn't speak the language and you couldn't communicate with people, you know it's easier said than done. And one other thing that we talked about, which is that, media can change society and reinforce society. These things are both true. The question, then, that we ask as we talk about global media, while we can disagree about the effects of media, and we'll talk about some of the competing theories later in the semester about how those effects work, we do know mass media are at least having some effect on people who consume it. If it is indeed true that media can both change and reinforce society, isn't it in the government's best interest to have some control over media who do that? This is former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and I apologize to anybody who knows how badly I butchered that particular name. He actually spoke way back in 2007 at Columbia University in New York. He said a lot of things. This one in particular kind of caught the eye of a lot of American critics at the time. The Associated Press pointed out that 2 Iranian boys had been hanged publicly on charges of assaulting other boys. They said before their executions that they were not aware that homosexual acts were punishable by death. And in 2003, a 16-year-old girl said to be suffering from a psychological disorder was executed in northern Iran on charges of an illegal relationship. One question, if you're a university president, would you have the Iranian president to visit? It's a fair question. A lot of people opposed the visit at the time, and during the introduction, the president of Columbia, Lee Bollinger, called Mahmoud a petty and cruel dictator. President George W. Bush said that the visit spoke volumes about the greatness of America, basically saying, while you may or may not like Iranian policies, there are not many places where your enemy is allowed to come and speak to you and would be judged based on those words. The First Amendment and the underlying idea of the marketplace of ideas is vital to what we do as mass communicators in the speech we allow as a society. Ahmadinejad also said this, where he said that there are many newspapers in the country that are criticizing the government, and in fact that those newspapers might be larger than those who are in favor of the government. Now, according to the AP, he was sort of telling the truth about this. There are more newspapers, usually smaller in circulation, that were opposed to his administration than those who were in favor. However, the government has closed a lot of liberal papers And the Washington-based Freedom House said the Iranian government has forcibly closed or banned more than 100 publications since 2000. That was in 2007. That number is larger since then. Iran has also limited the access of foreign press, and Freedom House said that Article 500 of the Iranian Penal Code states that anyone who undertakes any form of propaganda against the state could be sentenced to between 3 months and 1 year in prison, and it leaves that term propaganda undefined. The picture you see, Jason Rezaian, was a Washington Post journalist who was jailed in Iran for espionage. He was his trial was held privately, and eventually released in January 2016, the same day the U.S. released roughly $1.7 billion in frozen accounts to Iran. So you see that map there. Freedom House puts Iran on the list of not free countries when it comes to freedom of the press. Its annual list put Iran at number 190 of 197 in the nation's it studies, which is close to the bottom. It wrote about Iran at the time 185, partially because of their vaguely worded press law that forbids the publication of ideas contrary to Islamic principles or detrimental to public rights. Violators were punished harshly. And obviously there's that penal code that we talked about. They also have Article 513, which deems offenses that are an insult to religion as punishable by death or imprisonment, up to 5 years. Insult similarly undefined in the law. Other articles provide sentences of up to 2 years in prison, 74 lashes, or a fine for those convicted of intentionally creating anxiety and unease in the public mind, spreading false rumors, writing about acts that are not true, or criticizing state officials. Unfortunately, it also doesn't say what exactly gets you in trouble. It's up to the whim of the people in power. So think about it this way. If a police officer told you that you would go to jail for speeding, but there weren't any speed limit signs, you'd probably drive pretty slowly. The result of this is what we would call the chilling effect or self-censorship. People are afraid to speak up. In fact, right now, most people have talked about that the concept of freedom of speech and freedom of expression is backsliding in the world. As you can see, more than half of the world's population actually lives in a state of where there's little or no freedom of speech. As an American with the First Amendment that provides that explicitly guarantees that freedom, we should be feeling pretty blessed, right? So where do you think we rank on that list? I'll give you a minute. The answer is 48th. Yeah. That's actually down. We were number 17 back in 2007. As you can see, number 1 through 5 are all countries in the Scandinavian area. And at the bottom are such vacation spots as North Korea, Equatorial Guinea, and Syria. So why has the USA fallen? Well, part of it is news organizations are struggling financially, and they can't spend the time and money it takes to do good journalism. There are some other reasons. Since the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. government has become more aggressive at stopping leaks that they say threaten national security. Other people would say some of that information is important to know what our government's up to in our name. There are various stories from local areas where protesters have been arrested based on photographs that appeared in the newspaper. Or appeared on the newspaper's websites. People have their phones confiscated. Local authorities have attempted to kick government out of meetings, out of what should be open meetings, and so forth and so on. And the government has seized phone records from news organizations that were covering what the government was doing. I think it came to light not too long ago that the previous presidential administration, in fact, was attempting to seize phone records of reporters from the New York Times and that kind of thing.